Okay, let's get started, I guess. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here and welcome to the second episode in our series, How to Work Against the Institution You Work For. My name is Elisa Renfirm, and together with Nia Nicolaxe, I will host this event tonight. We are both board members of Erasmus School of Color and master students in sociology at the Erasmus University Rotterdam. ASOC is a collective affiliated with the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, and we work towards dismantling racist, patriarchal, and ableist structures within and beyond the university. As such, we organize several small and large-scale events, workshops, and we have written articles. In addition to that, we organize a reading group that also serves as a safe space for those who need it. It was during one of these reading groups that we discussed the text, The University Last Words, by Fred Moten and Stefano Harney. In this text, they raised the question, how to work against the institution you work for. Moten and Harney discussed this question in the context of the university. For us as student and staff within the university, this question is extra important and close to our hearts because it highlights the contradictions of working within and in some way against this institution. It highlights our vulnerabilities working within and against an institution that we are dependent on, being for a diploma or a paycheck. We believe that this question should always be addressed in collectivity because we cannot hope to dismantle problematic structures by ourselves individually and shouldn't have to either. This very event has been made possible with the help of our community, our speakers, our public, and the Erasmus Institute for Public Knowledge. The Erasmus Institute for Public Knowledge is an interdisciplinary research institute that funded this event, for which we are very grateful. In January, during our first episode, which was, not surprisingly, about the university, we discussed the question with different people working within academia, exchanging with each other our viewpoints, experiences, and practices.
Today, we will discuss the same question, how to work against the institution you work for, but this time we will focus not on the academia, but on art institutions. We engage in this discussion with our amazing speakers who all have experience with working in or with art institutions. They will not necessarily reflect on the essay by Moten and Harney, but this question serves as a starting point for our speakers to share their views and experiences. I will very briefly introduce our guests today, but their full bios can be found on the Instagram page of Erasmus School of Color. So if you haven't seen that yet, check out our Instagram page. So our first speaker today is Leana. Leana is a curator, program maker, and researcher involved with different community-based collectives and collaborative projects, with a background in gender studies and post-colonial studies. Our second speaker is Malique Mohamud. Malique is a writer, researcher, and designer. Recurring themes in his work are autonomy, disruption, and urban geopolitics. The next speaker, before we take a short break, is Dean Bowen. Dean is a poet, a performer, and a psychonaut. Most people from Rotterdam will know him as the Poet Laureate of the city in 2019 and 2020. And then after the break, we will have Arjîn Elgersma. Arjîn is a resident DJ and organizer at KLAUW Collective. KLAUW Collective is a multidisciplinary group of creatives working on safer spaces where they prioritize queer and BIPOC people. Finally, we have Simone Von Sarlos, who is a writer based in Amsterdam. They have published several books and columns. Currently, they are teaching at the Ecology Futures Master at AKV St. Joost. And from May to October 2021, they are a guest curator at Het Hem. Before we invite Leana to speak, We want to remind you that since we have 5 speakers today, we will collect all your questions and address them after our last speaker. So please feel free to share, post your questions in the chat, and then they will be addressed at the end. So yeah, Leana, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your introduction, and also thank you so much for organizing this event. So yeah, let me start off with a bit of context. I work as a curator at Costco Art Institute, working for the Commons, which is based in Utrecht, where I work part-time. And I also work as a cultural programmer, researcher, and I'm active in different collectives and working groups. So when preparing for this event and thinking through this question of what it means to work against the institution you work for, I must say that I currently feel very lucky to work at an art institution with a relatively small team that works for the Commons, whereas the Commons can be described as the natural and cultural resources held in common by a community. And for example, community gardens, mutual aid networks, and open source software are all examples of the Commons. And the Commons require a collaborative process, which we call commoning, and it's based on shared ethics and values, such as diversity, equity, and sustainability. And making the link to art, it means the understanding that art is an imaginative way of doing and being, which connects, heals, opens, and moves people into the new social visions. So working at Costco means for me that I know that we as a team share the same values, and we can openly speak about anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, decoloniality, etc. And Costco also values long-term collaboration and operates within and for the ecosystem. Yeah, and we also experiment with organizational structures, and we as a team do a lot of self-reflection about our position as an art institution within the arts and cultural field, but also within society and what it means to be an art institution. Yeah, so we often also think about these binaries related to these questions, such as the binaries of public versus private, or individual artists versus collective art projects, and so on. So yeah, as a curator, I also reflect a lot on my curatorial practice and how I can address certain topics or issues in the way I organize things, and what it means to bring people into a space that's maybe not always safe, or how to make it a better or welcoming space for everyone, and also how to work with people that are not familiar with art institutions, but who are familiar with the art because they embody the values and the stories these artworks try to tell. So yeah, I do of course see the value of providing space for people to share their stories. And besides that, I also see the important value of taking the resources and providing the tools for those outside the art institutions. Also because it's the right thing to do, because art institutions in general generate their relevance by portraying themselves as including for everyone and being welcoming to everyone, while they are not. So this question, what does it mean to work against the institution you work for, resonated more with me when it comes to my freelance work and how I'm invited into institutions, but then also leave quite soon when my work is done. And how I try to navigate this, also relating to what I said before, so that I try to bring in people if I take on a long-term project, and really try to distribute the financial means of the institution, and also, yeah, as someone who can navigate inside and outside these institutions, to have these hard conversations with those taking these positions within those institutions. So also thinking about the text that you sent before about the university, written by Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, I think for me what it means to work against the institution you work for means that, yeah, I'm talking about art institutions in general now. You must be aware of the fact that art institutions often hoard ideas, knowledge, and appropriate certain cultural expressions and aesthetic resources to keep up this image of importance. So to me, it is important to know that I'm not by myself, and that building alliances is something I and we have to do all the time. And this is also why I'm part of two collectives called Not a Playground and Junction, who both formulate critique, trying to hold these institutions accountable. And we do not do that because we care so much about these institutions, but because they actually do harm and exclude many people while often taking public money. And yeah, they hold power in many ways, of course. Also by, for example, expanding their territory to neighborhoods outside the city center, talking about Rotterdam now, which can eventually lead to processes of gentrification. And this also makes me think of a recent conversation that took place around the strike that was organized against MoMA, the Modern Art Museum of Modern Art in New York, where different people and also friend Moten and Stefano Harney came together. Yeah, and some comments really stuck with me, and I can resonate a lot with what they said. For example, Jos Puar said, yeah, we could see these spaces we inhabit when we work against institutions as training grounds and ways of practicing using the stature of the museums against themselves. And how this could eventually be seen within a larger picture of taking something from the institute to twist it and make it our own and then use it against them, kind of. And Fred Moten also stated that we need to get our shit together and render these institutions obsolete. So yeah, you know, the culture is there, the art is there. So why would we not try to break down the walls that create these hierarchies and binaries? And what was also mentioned then by the speaker, Amin Hussain, was, you know, that we could maybe also see it as working through the institution to get to another point. So to conclude, I would say that working against the art institution in general, how I envision it is by reappropriating, making things our own again, taking up space, trying to get the resources and tools and the power these institutions hold back in our own hands and build alliances and do collective work. You know, besides from, of course, working outside these institutions and not engaging with them. So yeah, this means we have to navigate a complex space if we want to do this. But for me, working against the institutions we work for also means not letting my inherent value depend on what the institute values or think is important. Yeah, and try to imagine a world where all sorts of modern / colonial / white institutions maybe should be abolished. And that we, as the ones that are working against these institutions, also all have our shared responsibility in restoring our collectivity and taking back what has been destroyed and what has been taken from us. So I'll stop here and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Leana. Thank you so much. Malique, will you take over?
Yes. Thanks for the invitation, peoples. I might need 5 minutes to get the old English juices flowing. So until that time, it might be a little bit of Dinglish, but we'll try. Yes. My name is Malique Mohamud, the baddest rapper in the underground. I like to introduce myself as such lately, as a reminder for me not to stray too far away from what I started out doing, and that's writing raps and duking it out with the mandem in op het pleintje. And I also call myself a hip-hop futurist, which is an attempt or an exploration of thinking how and in what ways the culture, hip-hop culture, could move into different avenues, be it design, be it design of public space, or policy design, or education, or all different types of hip-hop, making the culture engage more with public causes, or interact in a more political, explicit political way with the commons. And we're actually sitting here in the night shop. Some of y'all must have, hold on, let me time myself because time flies. We're sitting here in the night shop, and this is the result of a journey that took a couple of years, and a question of me asking myself is if most public institutions, damn near all, dare I say, all institutions aren't built to represent or reflect my lived experience, and therefore aren't here to serve me and people that look like me. What could an institutional space look like that's actually built up out of the typology of things that I do connect with? And eventually, actually it started out as a punchline, as a joke. I said, well, maybe we should open a night shop and blah, 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 blah. And then now here we are. And this space is positioned in a couple of ways, as an anti-gentrification test site, a research center for urban culture. And what we do is a lot of stuff, obviously, but it boils down to developing language and models that facilitate or strategies that facilitate a certain negotiation with the powers that be within on an urban scale, and which is all fancy talk with trying to make it do what it do in the city, and having to deal with public institutions that have lots of moolah, and the mission is and always been to ontfrutsel de moolah, and I proudly say that the first time I finessed an insurance company was when I was 14 years old, and that was the thing we used to do. So stealing from the institution is part and parcel, part of the culture that I've been raised in, and so basically trying to keep making it do what it do, and extrapolating methods and strategies and language in order for us to continue doing dope shit. And I think it's, without making it sound pretentious or whatever, I truly think that we're at the foreground of developing strategies how to finesse these institutions. And for instance, we work with the New Institute. I don't work for the Institute. I actually instrumentalize the New Institute, and I'm quite open about it. And we're currently talking with the IABR, Internationale Architectuurbiennale Rotterdam, and quite open with them is in what our MO is, and our MO is to get the moolah and to use them to further our agenda. And we actually have models through which we can vocalize certain positions and help people, had de neus dezelfde kant op, getting people on the same page, and which is quite exciting because the New Institute and the IABR are both huge ass institutions in the field of architecture. They don't work together. But it seems that we made it possible to get moolah from here and moolah from there, and wrapped up in a program that's actually built to put people in position to actually reimagine the public space. And because there are a few squares here that are bound to be redeveloped with all different types of policy agendas, as in vergroening and blue and green sensitive. But it's always interesting that the public space is always made green when certain people are being invited and a certain public is being built for. So what we try to do is hack that policy window of opportunity and use those institutions and finesse them basically to work with us to generate, to make tastbaar, inclusieve stedelijke ontwikkeling, an inclusive approach to urban development, but I think that's even a corny way to word it. I prefer to actually say designing from a specific locality, from a specific localities and embodiments, designing from the context that you work from. And it happens to be inclusive. People can call it, people can even call it diversity. It's fun. Yeah, whatever makes the moolah move, basically. And earlier on, I mentioned that we also develop language. And hold on. This IABR I was talking about just now, they have a biennial going on that is called Reclaiming the Commons. And what they intend to do is materialize a transition practice, een transitiepraktijk in Bospolder Tussendijken, the neighborhood above on the northern side of the Maas that is bound, that's up for gentrification. But the interesting thing is that we've been working on this so-called transitiepraktijk for a couple of years, so we have, in some sense, a competitive edge. And back to the language thing, I've been thinking a lot about sauce and theorizing sauce and working on the work of contemporary philosopher Gucci Mane, and forever indebted to the work of this great thinker. And I actually read the sauce as cultural capital from the periphery, from de buurt, with the hoofdletter B, a natural resource that is produced and lived in the hood, which is extracted and then refined and packaged and resold to us in commercials for sneakers, in commercials for art exhibitions, and all types of public and private doo-doo. So what we try to do is refine the sauce ourselves, or not even refine it and reflect upon it, and use that sauce to redevelop the context from where it's produced. So we produce knowledge, we theorize, we build models in order to actually just make it do what it do. Basically, what I've been trying to do for the past, I don't know how long in this city, and walking against all these barriers, or being invited to walk through these barriers and being awarded the space of the most coveted Negro as in getting all the praise, getting all the attention and visibility that comes along with it. And but eventually realizing that if I really want to retain dignity while making it do what it do, we'll have to work on strategies and working in a collective manner. Because if we have to refine the sauce collectively in order to even to seriously think of alternate ways of organizing and being in the city. So yeah, let me round this up with a bang bang, a krakaka, and a brrr, and that's my time.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dean.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dean Bowen, a poet, performer, professional haver of opinions. So when I was asked to do this, I think there was something of a misconception where I thought it was a panel discussion. So I had to kind of reshape all my thoughts this question kind of evoked, and I tried to write them down. Part of it got put to paper. It's kind of rough, and part of it I'm just gonna wing. So bear with me, please. But I think I have to do this first written introduction just to kind of flesh out some of the core concepts that I wanted to address. So when I was invited to participate in this event, I had to ask myself if I truly understood the premise of what the organizers had put forth. First, because I think there are very many variables in the collective understanding of what any of the terms included in the premise actually mean. Secondly, because I did not know whom the organizers were inviting. If they were inviting Dean Bowen, the artist, Dean Bowen, the cultural critic, Dean Bowen, the program maker, or even Dean Bowen, member of several committees within the art and culture space, whom some, even in this small selection of speakers today, consider to be a sellout. And although I remain who I am at any given moment in time, and as such, I never feel any obligation to justify myself, I do believe we have to be aware of our own multiplicity when it comes to addressing a question like the one put forth by the organizers and Mr. Moten and Harney, respectfully. Both context and circumstances influence how we are to understand ourselves in our ability to address this question. Because the complex issue at hand, and I do believe it is a very complex issue, is that we do not navigate any ecosystem as any one singular thing. We are constantly managing a plethora of forces trying to maximize what we have set out to achieve, whilst continuously having to consider what the effect might be for those we understand our communities to be. So in the time allotted, I will briefly dissect the terms which might cause confusion, to then circle back to this idea of community, the commons, and my personal relationship to them. First, I would like to define work. With work, we are to consider any labor or effort invested in the instantiation or sustainment of the machinations of any one network entity. We have to be aware that work within any structure is a broad stroke term applicable to very many people, not all of whom have any real control of the dynamics within that organization. So for this discussion, I would like to state clearly that the work I will be referring to is the kind of labor that sees its practitioners having a modicum of autonomy in their praxis, such that we might be able to hold them accountable for said work. Secondly, I would like to address the term institution. Though it is tempting to use this term in a broadly accurate way, I would like to emphasize that it is often a term used carelessly. The institution, as in the abstract, is often used as a placeholder term for any kind of organization where a perceived power dynamic is at play, often one to be problematized without acknowledging that there are vast disparities between organizations that would be considered institutions within the abstract usage. As such, I would like to pinpoint that whenever I refer to the Institute, I am addressing any organization that holds a disproportionate amount of resources as allocated by municipalities, national governments, or private sources. I do this all to focus the discussion on where I believe it should be, namely the access to and dispersing of these aforementioned resources and the ways in which, given all those different ways we navigate the institutional ecosystems, we as individuals and as communities are able to work against the systems at play and the responsibilities that brings with it. Because if I'm truly honest, I am very much tired. Specifically, I'm tired of the performative ways in which I often see a large part of the discussion dissolve into everything I understand to be the antithesis of what I believe to be the most important aspect of laboring against what we would understand the institution to be. Namely, the formulation and coordination of parallel strategies to reformulate not only what the institution would be as an abstract, but how to redefine the machinations in such a way that equitability, sustainability, and responsibility are the primary considerations through which we might approach a paradigm shift that would instantiate the kinds of institutions we would like to see going forward. This is an immense task, far too big a burden for any one individual to carry. However, there are ways in which the individual can contribute. The problem herein lies in what is considered valued contribution and how to avoid conflict of proponents of strategies that might at first glance seem to clash. And this is what I would consider the work. This is precisely the true weight of where the labor lies. So having that introduction, what does that then mean for me personally? As an artist first, I've always had the opportunity to navigate institutions pretty freely because of my own necessity, right? I think that often in our relation to the institutions, we have a sense of analyzing it in a singular way where those who are capable of dispersing the resources have the power, and those who are in need of the resources then are kind of at the whim of the institution. And in my own personal experiences, I have learned very much that without those who can put the resources to proper use and utilize those resources to create space, hold space for other people, create communities, or create moments and interactions that kind of facilitate the buildings of communities, those institutions have nothing to actually work with. And it is in this realization that I believe that in the banding together of communities, of those willing and able to take on the responsibility of the work, we have the capability and the possibility to help redefine what an institution might look like. For inspiration on kind of the developing ideas that I have concerning the institutions, I have learned very much from my queer friends and queer communities. As is often the case, those in marginalized situations or communities are often very much revolutionary in their approach to how they think about and formulate what community could even look like. What I've learned very much is that community has toxic, can have, let me be exactly, can have very toxic connotations for a lot of people. And this has come quite clearly into focus in recent years, especially this last year, where we had considerably less social interaction. I realized that the ways in which I personally tend to hold community is not necessarily by actively and continuously participating in any kind of performative sense. It is understanding myself to be part of a larger conversation, to be part of a larger movement, but also holding space where, for myself, wherein I do not have to continuously perform my allegiance to those communities. My allegiance to those communities then are expressed in the ways that I deem safe and necessary for me to be able to engage with both those communities and the institutions that I collaborate with. To make this concrete, I've had a weird upbringing in the way that compared to a lot of people of color, I was raised very much separated from communities of color for a large part of my life. What that has given me is a few things. First, it's given me access to a kind of code switching, and I think that all peoples have access to code switching. I'm not unique in this, but to a kind of code switching that renders me quite safe in a lot of spaces that aren't necessarily built for me. And I kind of have thick skin, which helps. So what I've come to understand is that the ways in which I can contribute to kind of the ways in which I would like institutions to develop and can work for the communities that I do feel part of is utilizing those two aspects, the understanding of what kind of language people deem comfortable, and my own kind of comfortability in being uncomfortable or being in spaces that aren't necessarily designed for me, to formulate dissent, to formulate a way of thinking that might not be within kind of the scope or the DNA of these conversations that I'm having and the people that I'm having them with. This is difficult because I always sit at these tables with the understanding that I'm not sitting there as Dean Bowen. This is why I think individual conversations that I have with people within my own communities are very, very important. I'm never trying to represent a singular perspective, but I'm always trying to, in an almost democratic way, represent an accumulation of perspectives, which often leads to a circumstance where I might be contradictory, or where I might be, as I sometimes say, might represent a position that I do not necessarily personally hold, but I do deem important for any given discussion. And it is in this understanding of my own multiplicity, the ways in which others resonate in my presence wherever I am, that I see one of the, or at least my most important contribution to what the reformulation or reinstatement of any institution might look like. However, this comes at a price, because not necessarily being clued into the cultural codes of communities of colors in such a way that make me easily identified as one of their own, often creates a situation where my intentions are being questioned. Also, my comfortability with navigating institutions that are predominantly white or have kind of problematic aspects to their machinations also create circumstances wherein I personally am problematized for engaging with these spaces and with these people. To give a good example of this, because I was the poet laureate for the city of Rotterdam, I was asked if I wanted to be an ambassador for Fine Arts City. I don't think I have to explain to anybody what the problem of gentrification and why kind of this big multi-million billion euro project might be or should be problematized. However, I did agree to become an ambassador of this project, and I'll explain why. I became an ambassador of this project because I was able to negotiate a few points in the contract that I deemed important in having to be addressed in the development of what Fine Arts City is. With me, a few others became ambassadors, but the thing with a project like Fine Arts City is that there is very little that the individual or marginalized communities can actually do against the pure force of millions and millions of euros. However, there is, I think, a way of invading certain conversations in such a way that a certain voice can take part in the social development of and the accountability and the holding accountable of those involved in projects like these. So what I was able to negotiate was that I could invite people to the table in the conversations about the development of the social aspects of that urban planning, people that are very vocally against the building of Fine Arts City. I was also able to negotiate that whatever my contribution would be, and I agreed to being in kind of a commercial thing for them, but that in all my personal outings about Fine Arts City, I could be critical in the ways that I wanted to be. And I think that the being able to negotiate these kind of things come forth from kind of my artistic practice, where it is very much a singular thing, where it is very much this artist on its island, especially if you're a writer. I think some of you might relate. This all to say the following. I think that the most important aspect of what anybody can do in trying to address the problem of the institution, full stop, is to understand that there are a multiplicity of parallel realities that we have to understand and have to engage with if we are truly passionate about the project of reformulating what the institution might look like. And as such, we have to understand that what some might consider kind of grassroots community strategies might be as valuable as what I would like to call lone wolf strategies. We have to take away the connotation that lone wolf strategies are there to benefit the lone wolf. But we have to be able to see those strategies for what they are. They might be strategies of people that hold community in a different way than we might expect, but hold community nonetheless. And I think that if we allow ourselves to for lack of a better word, queer our understanding of what it means to hold community and what it means to strategize against kind of the more problematic aspects of what the institution might represent, then I think we have the possibility to create magic. I yield my time.
Thank you, Dean, for your very personal story. It was very nice to hear. Let's take a short break, everybody. You can get some drinks or a bathroom break and maybe meet in 5 minutes or maybe 10. Let's say we start again at 10 past. Is that okay? Cool.
Okay, so I think that most, if not all people are back from the short break. I see there have been some questions posted in the chat for which I thank you. And I've also seen that Leana even responded to one question already, so great. So without much further ado, let's go to Arjîn, if he is still here.
I am. Okay. My name is Arjîn. I'm a part of KLAUW Collective, which they already introduced a little bit. First of all, I also want to say thank you for the invite. I was really looking forward to the event, also because it is such a difficult question to navigate, and I was really looking forward to hearing what the other speakers also had to say about how they navigate this question. So I want to start a little bit with what KLAUW is. I want to start also on a personal note on how I came to KLAUW, and then talk a little bit about how we've navigated working with institutions. So KLAUW, before KLAUW even existed, there was Gender Bender Queer Party, who was providing queer communities, or you could say providing for and provided by queer communities, a club experience that was more than just going out, but a returning to, as well as homage to, where electronic music, particularly the legacies of house and techno, come from, which were Black, Latin, queer communities. These are safer spaces to celebrate all that is queer, which I interpret as difference, as my friend Nichenda beautifully says, spaces of possible creation and destruction, to explore oneself not only as an individual, but as a collective, finding ways to survive and navigate the outside world, while also striving for transgressive practices that don't just take place in the club. I really like, during a bell hooks lecture, she called these kind of spaces of radical openness. And I really identify with that term, because safer spaces is kind of now being appropriated also by other platforms, clubs, etc. As a way of saying we're queer, but we're not going to explicitly say so in order not to alienate a straight, white, cis, het, male, etc., audience. Unfortunately, I wasn't there to experience the legendary gender-bending queer parties, but luckily a few of the younger queers who were there decided at the last party to continue their legacy through what is now KLAUW. I clearly also remember going to KLAUW's first party. I went with a friend and ended up for the first time experiencing a space where I felt whole rather than how I had fragmented the way I practiced my queer, Kurdish, Dutch, etc., identity. And experience this feeling alongside with everyone there, dancing halai to music I've never heard in a queer setting, because being Middle Eastern and queer is still widely perceived as mutually exclusive. So at the time I joined KLAUW, we were only throwing club nights. And soon after I joined the organization to work on providing these spaces for myself as well for others, KLAUW started to rapidly grow. And during the pandemic, we knew that we had to continue in some shape or form with organizing in a non-physical sense. So we started with a magazine, received a subsidy from the municipality to give accessible workshops to people from our communities to grow in artistic practices, like, for example, DJing, and also started doing hosting gigs. For example, we're standing at Milkshake Festival this year. So let me just have a drink quickly. We couldn't have gotten where we are now without some sort of institutional support, and are continuously being faced with these kind of cost-benefit analyses, whether working together with particular institutions who are more powerful than, I guess, the institution we are, whether us working for them is going to be beneficial for our communities, which consists of vulnerable people who are survivors nonetheless. So for this reason, we focus largely inwards rather than looking outwards. We are an activist platform, but not in the conventional sense. We believe that community care, queer joy, carving spaces for ourselves rather than asking for a seat at the table is most important and has priority above anything else. While at the same time, sometimes it has become necessary for us to have a seat at the table, even if it's brief, to be able to redistribute resources that would otherwise be invested in initiatives who frankly don't give a fuck about our bodies. So this morning I was rereading The University Last Words by Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, which I was gladly introduced to by the ESOC members. So while I was reading it for the first time, I definitely felt a fire inside me growing, especially the ways in which they speak in uncompromising, provocative, and radical terms. Then again, after rereading it, I also find myself at odds in the context of what we do in KLAUW, because to be disruptive also has the cost of not being able to work for institutions whose resources could possibly be distributed to our communities. And so knowing when to practice your presence, knowing when to say yes to a gig becomes a very difficult task. Recently, we had to come to terms with our collective growing rapidly, our name being thrown around quite often, and affirmed that what stays most crucial for us is to remember where we came from, which were the smaller club nights that we were throwing at Warm. These nights have been very transformative for myself and are transformative for members of different communities who come together to heal through dance and music. At the same time, as a grassroots organization, we cannot afford to say no to every institution asking us to work for them. And I say work for because unfortunately it's seldom a collaborative effort with agreed upon terms. So when it comes to the question, how can we work for and against institutions? We definitely don't have an answer. Instead, a lot more fucking questions that still help us navigate the different forms of offers and different forms of institutions who we work with, because they are not all like the university. And I liked as well that Dean reminded us that institutions are not homogenous. There are different institutions and they have different intentions. And even though intentions at a certain point don't matter, some are trying to do better, even though there is a fundamental difference in the language they speak, its effect, and the different priorities they have. So in other words, every decision we make, every offer we get is discussed at length. And even though it's really fucking tiring sometimes, it's necessary for us to make sure that as a queer organization, through our differences, we can help each other come to a decision of whether a particular gig or a job is actually going to help the communities we prioritize. And I think Leana has also clarified that a lot. It's a lot of self-reflection. It also means reflecting on KLAUW being an institution itself that organizing together always means that there is going to be someone excluded, and the best we can do is remain cognizant of that.
Thank you very much, Arjîn, also for your very personal and open talk. It's really appreciated. I would like to give the floor to our last, but definitely not the least speaker for today, Simone Von Sarlos, please.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Arjîn and Leana and Dean and Malique for your contributions. Yeah, I learned a lot from your practices. And maybe I'd like to start with inviting each of you who's in this call to look at the screen if you are able to do so, and speak inside of yourself 3 of the names that you're encountering on the screen. So I'd like to start usually these Zoom spaces saying everybody's name who's present. And of course, also allowing people to correct, my pronunciation of a name, of course, but to just call people into the room and to hold space together. But because of the amount of people here today and because of the lack of time, maybe let's not do that. And therefore, I just ask you to maybe call 3 people in that you see on the screen. I'll also start with an audio description of what you are seeing if you are looking at the screen. So I am a white person. I have to actually look at my own image. I am a white person. I'm wearing a blue jacket, and I have short blonde hair, and I'm wearing, I would say, ugly AirPods in my ears. And of course, just also bringing present the multiple ways that we can be present in a room and the multiple ways that we can access knowledge and presence. And I think that holding space is already one way of working against the institution. I've noticed that institutions work with, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has noticed, work with damage control more than holding space, where damage control is sort of the direct response to a problem that arises because somebody has named a problem, and therefore, as Salah Ahmed would say, becomes a problem. But instead of really just holding space for the problem, I've recently encountered a moment in an institution that there was a fear of image loss, right? This idea that, oh, this person doesn't like working with us, now we have to perform damage control. And this, I think, is completely remarkable of how problems are approached, not from the holding space, which to me visually feels like sort of laying back, maybe together breathing, setting some confines to which we want to enter space together, instead of responding and trying to extinguish the fire, so to say, right? Like, how do we make space for fire? And one of the recommendations that I would have, in if you haven't already listened to it, would be Olave Douanje's podcast, Better Practices for Safer Spaces, which Olave has made with Kai Theater. And I think it's quite remarkable. Now, I think that holding space is also a form of delay, as well as these questions of accessibility, right? The moment that I'm putting in an audio description or asking or like saying each of your names, or if we start with breathing together, if you have short time, like I do, and I have a timer running actually, is that then you already taking space from this precious time, right? And I think on an institutional level, I would really encourage, or I try to encourage myself at least, to delay and to sort of bear or bar or get in the way of the rhythm of the institution. And the delay is also maybe a practice that I would would attribute to an artist like and a writer like Claudia Rankine, who has made, for example, a video work together with John Lucas, in which the moment of Zidane, which is during a soccer championship, headbutts another person, another soccer player, because he has been called a racial slur. And the moment is maybe a few seconds, or maybe a few seconds in real life as it was played and as people watched it during the soccer championship. But she delays it into several minutes, which allows for her to stretch this moment into an essay, basically. This moment of a few seconds is stretched into the possibility of bringing in different voices, Homi Bhabha, Ralph Ellison, and other poets and writers that sort of narrate this short moment. And the way that she delays it is also, I think, a way to do counter-historical work. And for me, this Claudia Rankine's focus on delay, yes, I think very inspirational when it comes to working in institutions. And this also brings me to thinking about opening times and closing times. So when we are working with institutions that have a space, like not hold space, but actually have spaces, as we were talking about, right? This has been said before, the possibility of distributing resources, space is of course a large part of that. And I'm actually posing this as a question more than I have any sort of practical possibility of answering this yet personally, because I see, as also Dean was saying about holding contradictions, so many contradictions here, because I think often that closing times and opening times are completely exclusionary, and also they disrupt often a moment of safer space that has been created and that has its own time, right? That doesn't follow this institutional time. But then I also completely, of course, wish to recognize that, for example, if there are security working in that space, that they have to go home at 5 o'clock. And that if you say, no, but this is really, this is not holding space to hold yourself to this kind of time, then you might also be really in the way of somebody's labor conditions. At the same time, of course, realizing that these labor conditions are there in place to exploit laborers. And so I just wanted to put in time as a question that I would love to talk about with the people here. It also makes me think about payment beyond indeed the closing time, right? Because this is often said like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, the guards have to go home. And I'm using guards as an example because often it's the people in institutional power, and of course I should also include myself in this at times, who say, no, the guards have to go home. We would like to stay, but the guards have to go home, which again affirms a hierarchical positioning within an institution where the guards are being talked about by the people in so-called artistic or creative power positions, which I think also relate to Dean's formulation actually of work, right? Where do we have autonomy? Whatever that word may mean. I'm not getting into definitions. Dean did that so perfectly. But there is also this question of like, oh, they're not going to get paid extra because we don't have those resources. And for me, this is one of the ways to tackle a question of resources and distribution, is that if I initiate, let's say, a project where money is part of the deal, which is the only project that I would want to initiate, then I always, if I ask somebody to perform work within that project or to be on board within that project, if to collaborate, I will tell upfront that I will pay no matter what. Like, you do not have to perform the work. The fact that I'm asking you this is already a form of work somehow, or an engagement. So if you do not hand in anything, you're still going to get paid. And this is, I think, for me, really important to say, because it's about the work ethics and about taking away a kind of collapse between value and money. And of course, then you see that I have also people that I work with who would be like, oh, but this is fucking confusing. What do you mean? Like, you don't want me to hand in anything? So there's also, of course, then this question comes in with accessibility. And I will say, of course, yeah, if you do not want to hand in, or if you cannot hand in, also thinking, of course, from disability justice organizing, not expecting that your body will work on the moments that you think a deadline is due. But there's also this question of saying like, oh, I do not expect anything for the money because I think actually the money should be free, can also disrupt people. I have a friend who I'm working with who said, well, I have ADHD, not to diagnose anybody, but this is her self-claim. And she said, I need actually these borders. I need you to tell me what to do, right? So this is, again, we're talking about negotiation and holding space, which has already been talked about. And I have like notes because of everything that you've said. So thank you so much. Since I'm like out of time and I could say so many things, I'm just gonna do one more thing, which is I'm going to name a list of recent projects. And then I'll say why I'm doing that. So recent projects that I'm currently engaged in are the spread of a monument in collaboration with the Institute TAC, Through the Window, in collaboration with Kubra Uzun and Omar Tefik Erten, and in collaboration, or supported by, I should say supported by, an unnamed fund because of political diplomacy. The Asterisk Conversation podcast, supported by Writers Unlimited, Herdenken Herdacht, which is a book. So it's by Uitgeverij Prometheus, and its translation, which is by a publication studio. And then the Abundance exhibition, which is at Het Hem. Then also Cruising Gezi Park, which is an audio installation work at Amsterdam Museum, as well as the Architecture of Sex, which is a symposium. Okay. I'm basically mimicking a CV here, but this is not why I'm mentioning it. I'm actually mentioning it because of the variation of institutions that are involved. And I think I will leave it with that my only sort of ongoing strategy throughout my practice so far has been that I'm very non-committed. How would I say it differently? That I'm very non-monogamous in my engagements, where there's many different institutions where I will work with. Of course, there's also a lot of institutions I will not work with, but I think personally, I really see this variation and this multiplicity and the non-monogamy with institutions as a way not to get self-identified with one of the institutions, which then helps to draw a line. For me, yeah, this is really working for me. I'm not saying this can be for everybody, which really helps to draw a line and to just leave and move, which is not, as Leana does with Casco, like this is a sustainable practice that she does. I don't think this is necessarily a sustainable practice. I also will say that this comes from a position of privilege where my embodied position is not formed by dispossession. So there is not a fear of not being part of one institution or another, because there's the conception from my white Dutch higher educated background that somehow, somewhere, there will be something having my back. So again, I'm not saying that this fluidity and non-monogamy works for everybody, but I did want to point that out as something to share. Thank you so much, and looking forward to hearing you all.
So thank you, Simone, as well. As I'm looking at the time, it is already 6:30. So let's immediately go towards questions from the audience. We have some questions from the chat box, but also people were able to submit questions beforehand. So I'd like to start, and I open the floor to all our speakers. So there's no particular person that I want to get an answer from. So feel welcome. One member of the audience asks, when and how should I quit my job? When do I come to the point that I don't agree with institutional policies? When is it time to step away? And how can I work to organize from within? Knowing that quitting is also a privilege and a statement, how can quitting, threatening to quit, civil disobedience, striking, speaking up, etc., be ways of communicating with institutions or bringing about structural changes? So a lot to unpack in this question. Would you like to respond, Simone, because you're still visible in my screen?
No, I cannot, because I was actually like thinking about Leana's contribution in the chat. So I'm sorry, I don't, I'm now thinking about Crip Time, sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine, because there's a lot going on in the chat as well. But to this person asking, you know, the different ways of bringing about structural changes or changing ways of communicating with institutions. They name, you know, quitting, threatening to quit, disobedience. Is there anything to say about people wanting to quit, or people thinking about quitting, or people wanting to deploy different kind of strategies to change institutions from within? And I'm asking it to anyone.
Well, I'm just gonna try and throw something out there. It's such an immense question. Okay, to all people asking questions, I know you're really good at them, but also if you ask 16 questions in one, it's really difficult to focus. But I think it's important, and I kind of applaud the fact that the person asking the question is cognizant of the fact that even being able to have these ideas, right, to entertain these ideas is understanding their own privilege. At the same time, I do think that that it is also important not to understate kind of the risks involved in these things, especially when a lot of the ecosystems that we find in any kind of institutions, but in specifically art institutions, it is a very kind of small world, right? So the resonances of a deliberate action like that might have implications in employment elsewhere. So I do want to kind of be able to state that there is also, no matter who you are, there's always risk involved in that. However, when one wants to address the institution, I think it's important to not only make a performative gesture, as this can easily kind of be a pat yourself on the back, feel good kind of thing, without it having kind of the lasting kind of effect that you might wish it had. I think if you are entertaining the quitting of your job, or even threatening the quitting of your job, it is important that you find co-conspirators, maybe, within the institution, because in any situation, the amassing of people will give you not only leverage, but will give you the amplification needed to actually try and have influence, which isn't to overstate that any one action or any accumulation of people will revolutionize how any institution works. I'm not that naive, but I do think that if you are entertaining kind of actions like this, it is very important to not only kind of think about the ramification, but try to influence as much as possible what those ramifications might look like, not only for yourself, but also for other people within that organization. Yeah, that. think.
If I might add real quick to possible unintended ramifications of speaking up and losing a job or quitting or being fired or being blackballed, or is that it also can work as a filter for people that do and are willing to engage with you in a mature way, so that you won't be necessarily, you won't have to watch your step as much after a certain accumulation of reputation, as one could say, because people do talk. So there are also interesting, positive ramifications, one could say. Quick addition.
Great, thank you for that addition as well. And thank you, Dean, of course, for giving a very thoughtful answer to this big question. So Simone, Arjîn, and or Leana, do any of you want to say something with regards to this question? Because we can also move on.
Yeah, oh, I see Arjîn also.
You
Maybe
go
we
first.
can do- Okay, thank you. So no, indeed, also to add, I think it really also depends on your own position, of course, if you're maybe a marginalized person or not, or maybe it's like, yeah, like as a white person, for example, working in a white institution, I feel like you should hold or have these conversations more. But in any case, I would also say, yeah, don't destroy or, you know, don't lose yourself also in this process of fighting, maybe, because I do think for many institutions, some individuals can be seen as quite disposable because, yeah, like someone else will step in and also just do the job. So that's maybe how I feel it, and maybe I'm a bit pessimistic.
Arjîn, you wanted to respond as well?
Yeah, I also wanted to say that at least what I see with most art institutions lately is that they are also capitalizing on the kind of language that is used in grassroots community organizing spaces to, you know, sell, like Malique was saying with the word diversity, right? It's just a buzzword that's thrown around nowadays. It's become a marketing tool. I think one thing you can do is that rather than thinking about whether you should quit or not, holding these kind of institutions accountable to the kind of rhetoric that they're employing with these kind of marketing strategies. And that's obviously easier said than done because, right, there is that kind of fundamental difference in the ways in which we think about, for example, what diversity is and what inclusivity is. But it's not impossible either. And often you're met with a lot of confusion. For example, when we were getting the subsidy for, well, actually we were approached for writing a subsidy by someone, and we very clearly were trying to also tell them that, you know, this is not just a way for them to put us in their yearly report and smile to their boss saying, you know, we did it, we supported a queer BIPOC organization. And I think they had difficulties grasping what we meant with that, but nonetheless, yeah, I think it's important to hold them accountable to the language they're using and to just be, you know, fucking real about what they're doing or what they're trying to do and be very transparent with them. Like Malique was also saying, right? You're just going to tell them to their face, like, you know, I'm going to use this money for this and this reason, you know, so we're not going to put your name anywhere. So yeah, holding them accountable to them probably thinking they're doing more than they are doing. So yeah.
Maybe I
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
could,
Simone, was that, I think?
Yes, if I just add maybe to that also, also the reformulation of what criticism is, because there's also a tempting potential in criticality, right? And I don't mean it in the performative sense, like, oh, it's nice for an institution to put criticism in their funding application, but also that there is a temptation in being drawn in where you correct, right? Like I'm thinking, for example, Olave in this Better Practices for Safer Spaces podcast, she talks about, that you only tell somebody something, for example, you only correct somebody who uses your wrong pronouns, for example, when you actually appreciate them enough to tell them. Otherwise, like there's an element of hope there, right? There's an element of engagement and proximity there when you do that. And I think that has been for me a really interesting way of reformulating it, like to where I'm like, well, if I don't tell you this, imagine how far away you would be. So there's like a lure of the love in a way, that you express also with criticality, not to romanticize then criticality. And maybe one more thing would be that anticipatory action is also action, right? I think that it's very tempting to think of action that looks grand, like Sara Ahmed giving up her job, or this person asking the question, giving up the job, where anticipatory action is muffled as a sort of like, oh, that's the lesser version, or it's less brave. But I think anticipatory action is also a form of strategizing that does not have this sort of grand overview, bird view form of strategy in it. So it's less attractive. But of course, the bird view strategy is also very dangerous because it's a universalizing one. So I think that anticipatory action, instead of this grand action, should also be reappreciated, if that makes sense.
If I might respond real quick, I'll try to tie a few responses together with what Arjîn was mentioning and Simone. As in the whole notion of criticality and the commodification of it. It's in Rotterdam, there was a period where institutions only needed to acquire the services of a brass band to seem, it's a while ago now. And eventually that became the break dancer and the spoken word artist. And now it seems that the decolonial thinker that criticizes the institution from within or is invited to critique the institution is where it's at the moment. And I think that there's also a class dynamic intersecting, that people with a certain capacity to flex lingo always dichter bij het vuur. And holding oneself accountable is also a challenge. As in, if you're in an echo chamber where people are sensitive to your plight, sensitive to to the complexities and the paradoxes that you're navigating. And for me personally, what I've been trying to grapple with is this situation where I'm making money and making this upwards mobility, social mobility, and not this tension of remaining close to a sense of home or sense of proximity to what I consider intimate, more intimate space rather than a safer space. But at the same time, needing to flex certain skills in order to create space and hold space for peoples that look like you. So yeah, and moving back to what I thought that we would have a panel afterwards, so I did the krakaka real quick and thought that I could engage later on. But if I might add a few things, is I'm not sure who, but someone mentioned contracts, and there's always this. I think it was a year ago now, almost July, August. We were in negotiation with one of our institutional partners, and I was working with a friend of mine who happens to be a lawyer, and trying to rework the contract and the whole idea of opdrachtgever and opdrachtgeverschap, and what that legally stipulates and implies, and because if the institution itself is working with public funds, as in what does it do? What does that reality do with the whole notion of being an opdrachtgever and quote unquote goed opdrachtgeverschap? And if we're talking about rebuilding, let me put it this way. In my attempts to use cultural programming to facilitate a certain motion within society that addresses or engages the whole notion of the commons in a certain way, then what contractual architecture is needed to reflect that reality? And the whole idea of the binary of opdrachtgever and opdrachtnemerschap, there are probably people trying to address that and tackle that, but that's something that I would just wanted to add of things that we're currently working on. And verdienmodellen. Maybe someone can talk a little bit about how different modes of making the moolah and diversifying your bonds, as the Riza would say, and again, having a shop front that having an income stream by selling levensmiddelen. That is in thinking of how it was quite interesting that some moments we're having meetings with different types of people's directors of institutions that find the whole night shop idea quite tantalizing, and at the same time selling Showtime haarwaks. In that same meeting, that it does something to the whole notion of professionality and what the different jobs, different hustles, and the types of how different jobs engender a different type of respectability. And but at the same time, as doing that research, getting a better understanding what economic and cultural production from the hood actually means and how that is threatened. So bringing that back to verdienmodellen, what we try to do is think of ways where you can reimagine the whole notion of institutionality and building own infrastructure with own revenues that's comprises out of services that people that need to keep looking fly, and at the same time working for public causes, as in reimagining public space, doing different types of research. So it's also quite interesting if we're talking about the ideas in how different people work in different ways with or against institutions. I hope to see more initiatives that challenge institutions from a more peripheral perspective. A whole lot of lingo, but just filling in the blanks of what I thought I missed just now.
Thank you. So this was a very complex question, but you all gave very diverse perspectives. You showed diverse perspectives in answering the question. So that is really great. Now, looking at the time, it is almost 7 o'clock, and I do want to be respectful all our times, like Simone mentioned as well. I think we have one last question. I think Nia collected one last question, but before we go to that question, I want to ask you, do you feel comfortable answering one last question, or should we end it now? Is it okay to take a moment of your time? More than we have already done? Yes, great. So if anybody needs to leave, you know, totally understandable. But I think Nia has one last question.
I had one question, but now it was already answered. And I think Malique asked a question to the other speakers to react if I didn't mistake. So I would like to give my question to one of you to respond to Malique's question, if you want.
I actually, when you were talking about contract, I was like, damn, that's some real shit also, because for example, right now we're not making enough money to for example, pay a lot of taxes to the government. And it's interesting because the ways in which corporations, big businesses, etc., always circumvent their responsibilities is because, for example, the law has very contradictory views of what is legal and what is illegal, right? So that is going to be made illegal and should be reprimanded is often people resisting against a racial capitalist system. And the contract is so central to how that works. And for us, for example, you know, when it comes to finessing the system, it also means, well, first of all, none of us are getting paid for what we do, and we probably won't be for quite a while. So we're doing the organizing in KLAUW next to our jobs, our studies, etc. But with the magazine, for example, we found a way to be a stichting, not pay taxes because of that for the sales of our magazine, so we can get money that can then be put back and redistributed into the different kind of activities and stuff that we organize. So I immediately thought about that when you said that. It's to kind of like fuck a little bit with the legal categories that they have, and find ways of getting a maximum income, to basically use the same strategies big businesses are using, and using those strategies against them.
I think that the ways in which we often think about these questions are within kind of this globalized, but specifically Western capitalist paradigm. And I think what is often overlooked is the variable concept that is capital, right? So, for example, one of the things that my partner does, who often kind of helps artists with their grants, or even collaborates with artists in reflecting on their artistic practice and helps them forward and things like that. She has this time system where she just kind of annotates how much time she has spent with the people that she worked with, and the payment then becomes a piece of art, right? That kind of corresponds with the amount of time she invested. And I think that there are two things that we need to be cognizant of. One is the work that we do within the community, and how do we then think about collaboration or even payment in that setting? Because I think payment can come in various ways, and I think that a lot of those don't necessarily have to be just cold hard cash. That's the community aspect of it. And I think that even in relation to the institution, where I'm kind of leaning towards Malique's side, where it's also just cough up the mullah. At the other hand, there is this thing that I've been trying to experiment with, where I'm demanding as part of the payment more responsibility, more resources for me to allocate as I see fit. So it's this understanding of how we, as those operating on the periphery but in tandem with or in collaboration with the institution, can kind of acquire power within those institutions, and then kind of creating kind of cracks in the armor through which we can then facilitate other people within the communities that we hold to gain access to those resources and facilities. So, and I know that this is something that is, it's a big investment, right? It's something that you have to acquire over time. But I do think that sometimes saying, well, fine, I'll take the pay cut, but then give me that, and demanding kind of the access to the resources, and you being able to be the one that is able to distribute them, is a way of thinking about being paid for work, right? Or being paid for labor that I think we should all kind of be cognizant of.
So thank you again. I feel like I'm saying a lot of thank yous today, but I feel it's all very applicable. I would like, I mean, we could talk about this for hours with each other. I very much like the vibe that we have here, but eventually all good things must come to an end, as well as this one. So I would like to end with, I've read a lot of questions in the chat box and in the forum as well about people yearning for hope, basically. So desperate, like, okay, we have these institutions and we have these conversations, but you know, where can we get hope from? So this is something that we could talk about as well. But I think that it is especially hopeful, the fact that we have this conversation right now, the fact that you all came to our virtual table, let's call it that way, and be able to exchange information and exchange experiences and ask each other questions is a very beautiful thing. And I think we should recognize that for what it is. That being said, yeah, like I said, we should wrap it up. First of all, I want to give a big thank you to all our speakers, Leana, Dean, Arjîn, Simone, and Malique, for investing their time in this event and sharing your experiences with all of us. Thank you. We also want to thank our fellow ESOC board members, Zuhair, Melissa, and Merel, for organizing this event and helping us moderate everything today. And lastly, we want to thank all of you who have been present today and who sadly had to leave already, who have listened and who have shared their own experiences, shared their questions. A big thanks to everybody.
Yeah, a big thank you to all of you indeed. This was so wonderful. I learned a lot of new words from everyone, and I really got inspired by your thoughts and your experiences. And even though some concepts I had already thought about, I really got inspired to link them in a different way. So really, really thank you so much for that. Some practical things. This event was recorded, and we will next week share the recording on YouTube. We will send everybody who registered via the form, we will send the video recording to them. If you want to stay updated about our future events, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And yeah, if you have any suggestions, if you have any questions, or if you want to make a remark, you can email us always via esokrotterdam@gmail.com or via the socials. A big thank you and have a wonderful evening.